Okay, so let's go back a few steps then.
Okay.
I presume you didn't know as a young boy growing up that you wanted to be a payroller.
No one really dreams of getting into payroll when they're a kid. What did I know about payroll? I know that when I got my first job, I got a paycheck, and somebody told me I was making X amount an hour, and I worked those number of hours. And when I looked at my paycheck, I didn't have $300. I had $250, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? I got gypped. So really didn't understand anything about payroll. So back in around 1994, I started working for Swiss Bank, believe it or not, in the mailroom. Now, the mailroom back in that day was just like an awesome position. You got to walk around and know people within the organization. So that's kind of what I did, but I was always ambitious and wanted to do more. So I started asking around, hey, is there any open positions? And funny enough, they had a payroll position open, and I applied, and they were kind enough to give me an opportunity. And I sat down to do my first payroll, and I was like, boy, this is easy. Look at this. And I flew through my data entry, and when we ran that payroll preview, I had so many mistakes. So I learned very quickly that payroll is really about precision, detail orientation, and that precision matters. So those early mistakes really helped me to start looking at payroll in a different light very early in my career. So I was thankful for that. But, it goes to show that, payroll is one of those industries that can like kill your ego very quickly. If you think you're smart, come try to do payroll, and then it will show you that you're not that smart.
And actually, funny enough, you mentioned it, like the mailroom clerk, that is a job that was replaced by technology because with the
Yes.
influx of email,
Yes. Yes.
retired that job. And here you are 30 years later at the cusp of another technological breakthrough. But this time, I guess you're on the other side of it. You're
Yeah.
in a senior position.
Thank God I didn't go the way of Kodak and said, I'm going to stick with mailroom. I'm going to deliver mail all my life. This is great.
Coming up next, an interview with Michael Francis, the world's oldest living mailroom boy.
Yeah, that wouldn't have worked. So I'm thankful that, payroll found me.
That's a common refrain, that you don't choose payroll, sometimes payroll chooses you.
Right. And my goal is really at some point where somebody actually says, you know what? There's so many opportunities in payroll. I'm gonna study that. I'm gonna go to school for that, and I'm going to do my internships and make sure, that's really what it needs to be. Because at the end of the day, usually, and this is what I try to tell payroll individuals, because usually when we tell our stories, it looks like, oh, it was like, okay, here's payroll. Just kind of do it. It's just a throwaway job. What I tell people all the time is that usually when the leadership is thinking about passing on payroll to an individual, they actually think very highly of that individual because they understand, maybe they don't understand everything about payroll, but they understand it needs to be right. And so they're always looking for and picking the person that they think they can get it right. And so that's a compliment, right? But we need to get off of that where you're picking people because somebody like me decides, I'm hanging it up and I'm leaving, and I gave you a month notice, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't see this coming, and let's just find somebody to do it. No, we need to move off of that. But at the end of the day, it's absolutely, for me, has been a wonderful career. It's afforded me to do so many things that maybe I couldn't have done. Definitely wouldn't have been able to do it if I stayed in the mailroom. But I'm actually very grateful, not only for the opportunities, but that every time I decided that I wanted to do more, that someone gave me the opportunity to do more to get me to the position where I'm now a global director of payroll, and probably going to be one of the first chief payroll executive officers that there will be. And that's my honest goal, because I know I can bring something to the C-suite if given the opportunity.
That's amazing, and I love that you've given yourself that goal. Not everyone who works in payroll does see themselves in the C-suite, but I think, as you say, if that's where your ambition lies, I think it's amazing to have the courage of your convictions and say, you know what, that's what I want, because that's what I believe the payroll function deserves.
Yeah, and I definitely don't ever want to get to the end of my career and go, I wish I had tried this. So I'm going to try. It may not happen, but I have that goal. I know what I bring to the table, and I just have to start showing and proving those things to the leadership of my current organization and in the industry itself. It says that I have a voice, and that hopefully whatever I share with that voice will help someone, even if it's just one person.
When you reflect then on your 30 years in the career, are there particular moments or decisions or even mentors that stand out as having shaped your perspective or just shaped your trajectory?
One of the things I say to people all the time is that, I was in payroll. I was kind of dabbling in payroll until I got to Johnson and Johnson. And at Johnson and Johnson, the biggest payroll I had before then was about 6,000 people, and that was at HBO. But then we went to Johnson and Johnson, and I was doing 10 times 60,000 people. I was, payroll tax person there. We were taking care of 70 different operating companies, all states in the United States. It was just really crazy. And we were doing all of our taxes in-house. So I got my my payroll PhD at Johnson & Johnson. But going back to your question, my moment there was really all about understanding just how I was really at the very tail end of the process. Payroll processing, you're not really at the tail end. Payroll tax, this is after payroll is run and I've got results. And there were so many mistakes that were coming in that I said, now, how do I prevent this? How do I affect not having these mistakes? So I understood, and that was a moment there for me where I understood I had to swim as far upstream as people will allow me. And so I went to individuals and say, hey, when you did this, this is the net result here. So how do we fix what you're doing here to make sure I don't have this result here? And so that for me always gave me the knowledge that I had to be collaborative. I had to work at building relationships with areas that provide data to payroll to really start being successful in payroll. And so that was a moment for me that kind of, I think, elevated me from, as a processor to now as someone who's now a strategic thinker that knows how to collaborate and work with different departments to get the result that we're looking for.
So much of what you've spoken about, Michael, I think is about change and change management within an organization. How do you personally advocate for change? How do you communicate the necessity? Because I think it's one thing that I often hear from payroll people is they feel the pain points, right? They know something needs to change, but the CFO doesn't necessarily understand why you need budget of X amount. We're all getting paid. What needs to be fixed?
Right. So a couple of things there, and I think one of the things that I find very fascinating about the payroll industry is how adverse to change most of us are. When we're in an industry that is constantly bombarded by change. So don't ever be adverse to it. Just embrace it. Understand that this is par for the course. Now, when you start doing implementations and so on, then that's where I think some of the angst comes from. What I usually try to do with regard to trying to advocate for change is really understanding what the end is going to be. So keeping the end in mind and start trying to communicate what that end state is going to look like. Because if that end state is better than what you're currently doing, some people may say, you know what, it's going to be painful, but I want to get there. So you really have to start building that end state. And then throughout the journey from this state to this state is celebrating your wins, celebrating the milestones. Hey, we did this, we got this done. At Virtual Congress, I'm going to be presenting about how do you keep your global teams engaged, right? And part of that is really about communication, about making sure that you set up these milestones that people can celebrate. So to answer your question very simply, change is part and parcel of what we do in payroll. Let's learn to embrace it. Make sure that you're celebrating your wins.